On F60, we have two, maybe three things that we wanted to try and see if we could iron out. There may be still some differing opinions. And we can reach out and take more testimony if we need to. We, I guess there may be four things. So the question of revenue, a revenue source. I had a conversation with advocates on that this afternoon or this morning, I guess when we wrapped up. How we want to handle a declaration of an emergency and whether that might want to be spelled out a little more clearly. Whether we want to have an opt-in, and then how we deal with the forest product sector here. So starting with revenue, we can certainly add a revenue source here. Likely that, and the concern that's been raised is without a dedicated revenue source, there's little hope that there'll be some funding in there. I am not, well, I will say I'm not confident that a revenue source would still be in the bill after it left Ways and Means. Doesn't mean that it would get stuck in Ways and Means, but that's also a possibility that if they didn't want to deal with it, it could get stuck there. We wouldn't want that to happen, obviously. And I don't think we should entirely discount the possibility that at the end of the day, there will be funding that comes out of whatever we pass for a budget. Based on conversations that I've had. So having said that, we can certainly consider adding a revenue source. And if we did that, then we want to take some testimony, find out a little bit more beyond what we've heard from people who've just reached out to us. Representative Boswell.
Should we make a committee bill that is just a dedicated revenue source to support agricultural funding and not tie it to the bill? So it could just be a separate thing considered. And then when we're talking about other things, we can say we're hoping to generate whatever X amount of money.
Interesting idea.
I mean, it doesn't, in a way, it doesn't put the pressure on, on the governor of voting against a bill that's to support farmers, but it also doesn't make it everybody else have to vote against it because they don't want to tax.
Yeah. If this all goes through this session and gets signed by the governor and passes, yet there's no funding associated with it, we could do that next session, just our own committee bill to put money into that. And it would give us time, I think, to think about where we're going to do this. I don't know, do you know how is that set up? And suppose we wanted to, I don't know, suppose we came up with some way to fund, how does that get written into, how does that work? How would that work?
Well, we would have Ledge Council, I think, sort of walk us through the intricacies of it, but we'd have JFO also, I guess, give us an estimate of how much certainly, let's say we came up with a way of an idea anyway, and we were thinking, well, what would a rate be and how much would it raise? And we get JFO to do that. I'm not sure if that's what your question is.
Yeah. But then it would still have to go through the full house and pass.
Yeah.
All the way through.
Okay. Yeah. And if we were to work on something now as a committee bill, we couldn't, such as the crossover rule, so nothing much would happen with it this year, but yeah, could possibly wait and then address that next year.
Because and we really don't know where this is going to go once it leaves here.
Yeah.
Whether it passes or the governor doesn't sign it.
Yeah.
Does universal school meals come out of the ed fund?
Yes.
Does.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking, I mean, the two in this committee, the two big ticket items would be universal school meals and this potentially are up around $40 million. So it'd be interesting to find a dedicated revenue source for those two.
Greg?
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe it's a little easier to get the legislation passed without trying to go through that, yeah, and then do all that next year.
Yeah, right, I mean, if it turns out, if the worst case scenario does happen and, the bill passes, but there is no funding, then we have a stronger argument, I suppose, too, in saying, well, okay.
You pass the, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we pass out at S60. Downstairs is gonna try to attach money to it, I've been told, whether they can or not, I don't know. But if we make the vehicle, and if a bad like 23 or 24, especially a 23 disaster hits again, and money comes in from the feds, they'll have a vehicle to put it in that can be rapidly deployed to farmers. And, the vehicle will be made, they won't be trying to go through BGAP and everything else. It'll be there, ready to receive that money and moving forward. I think that's a great idea.
There's, I know I've said this before, but there's also built into the bill the possibility of other funding sources.
Yes.
At least getting it started.
That right into your rich friends.
So. As a a bank essentially, it can accept any or all federal funds for farming and forest operation losses due to weather.
I think that there's language saying funds from public and private sources that the secretary accepts for the fund. And then separately, funds from federal government aid for state support of farmers. And then we've added forestry, suffering income loss.
Just because I would think, wouldn't it get tricky with if there were, like a FEMA type thing, there's certain requirements to qualify for that money from the federal government. And then if it went into this fund, then there's the same types of, different requirements, given that we have, state requirements for this fund.
Yeah, I don't know if
I don't know how that would work.
I don't know. I know there's a chunk of money coming. Was okayed and held, and now it's okayed again. It just hasn't got here yet. And I don't know if they plan on putting that money out to dairy farmers who didn't qualify for the other stuff or veggies. I don't know what. It's $20 million is quite a chunk of money.
BGAP was all state money, right?
Yes.
And then, you have the BAA sitting there and they could always, if we had a disaster, they could pull money out of that fund S60. I think we heard that yesterday. So,
Replenish it, right, if it was.
yeah, replenish it. So I think that we have the opportunity to create a worthy vehicle or a receptacle, a tool to do this stuff. And would we like to see it funded? Sure. Personally, I'd rather see 167 funded because we know that need is there now. We don't know if we're gonna have something happen. I'm thinking if we build this raincoat, we're gonna have a nice summer. The land we bought in Wolcott that's flooded 2 years in a row. The last time I saw that flood, my wife and I came back to Salt Lake City in the early 2000s in the summer. It had flooded then, or it might have been before we had kids in the mid-90s. It's been that long since that land is flooded in the summer. I don't think we're in that same July 10th flood event every year. The hurricanes are a different deal, but they're predicting less this year because of La Nina is dissipated. So who knows? But 167, we know the need is real.
So are we okay with then saying at this point, we won't write any revenue into the bill, but we'll, monitor things and maybe do some work between now and January on what that could look like if we needed to.
We can write it in, they just, probably take it out, but it doesn't cost much to write in.
Well, yeah, it may delay things in ways and means. That's,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. Wise one.
No.
Sometimes politics is political.
No, I just
Uh,
learned something.
So, all right, good. So I'll,
But continue to work on it, I
Check it.
think for next year would be interesting. 'cause
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if we, yeah. Let's talk next then about the declaration of an emergency as a precursor or requirement. We talked a little bit about this, Greg, and you had a thought if you wanted to.
So, yeah, I have a concern that one of the issues we've been trying to work out is making sure that different types of farming are treated equally with this fund, right? And that there's funding available, in May, June, whatever, April, sugar makers. And then there's that, there's also the potential, we just don't know exactly what the program is gonna look like once it gets implemented. How much workload there is for board members, how many applications a year are gonna come in, right? We really don't know. One thing I was suggesting is that we give a possible tool to for the board in order to be able to say no more frequently if they have to on applications, because as it stands, I mean, I make sure there's enough language in the bill to ensure that. But giving the option to declare or have, awards contingent on declaration of disaster is a potential tool for that. And David and I discussed it and putting language in that says that the board may elect to use declaration of disaster for a requirement for awarding, or however we end up wording that idea.
Mhm.
So that they have that tool in case they need it. If we don't know how much funding it's going to have, we don't know how many applications a year we receive. We don't know the nature necessarily of those applications. It's gonna be the severe thunderstorm that rolls through and knocks down, like it did for me last year, 3 acres of corn. Is that gonna be the majority of the applications that they receive? So that when, the major hurricane rolls through and hurts a lot of farmers and affects more of their livelihood, there isn't funding in there to be able to help. I'm a little worried about supplementing small losses, which granted, small losses can be big losses for some farmers. I understand that. But if it's peddled out, it's a lot of small amounts, and then the big disasters come along and there's no money in there, and the funding from the feds isn't coming for 6 months or a year, right, or whatever, you know what I'm saying? I feel like there needs to be at least a tool that's in statute that they have to be able to make sure it's getting doled out equitably.
So some sort of declaration is gonna be made. Is that what
I'm just saying, yeah, putting in there and this is basically letting the board use their wisdom and judgment based on what they see, because there's so many unknowns here. But it just gives them the tool to be able to say, that they could use any time they choose, basically, a declaration of emergency to regulate how much, whether or not they award requests. Does that make sense? No, I'm not.
So it would be the board who would make a determination if it's a disaster, correct?
I would let that.
They would make the declaration. And
I think that's what we were.
Yeah, and I think that it could even be that we're giving the board the leeway to do that.
It's not saying that they have
Yeah.
to.
That
They could if they wanted.
if they felt that it would be, and it might be something that, again, I'm putting words in your mouth, so it's, if I'm getting it wrong.
I'm trying to put words in my mouth.
If at some point, several months into the program, maybe there've been a few awards or a few claims, or maybe there've been a few weather events, and the board is feeling like, it might be helpful just to help streamline the work here if we added a step to the process that involved, saying up this, here's this weather event, it qualifies, to limit too many applications coming in that weren't going to be approved. Does that capture what you're?
Yeah. So yeah.
So they could approve an application, even if the board did not declare some kind of whatever, a disaster declaration. So a person could still apply and get money even if the board hadn't.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the language right now doesn't stipulate that there has to be.
Right.
Yeah, I think that, we could ask Michael Grady for some reaction to this, but it may be that just as written, the board would already have that authority. I mean, right now, certainly the board has complete authority to decide who it recommends. I mean, it's recommending ultimately to the agency, and the agency is making the final decision. But there's nothing written in here that dictates that they couldn't, I think, come up with an algorithm or, a set of steps. So it may be that we don't really need to add any language to allow them to do this. It would just be perhaps making it a little more explicit. That's something we thought about and said, here's something that you might use, an approach you might take.
Do you think that anybody at the agency kind of tracks, like Greg's example of what happened at his farm last year, these sort of one-off events that could be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 farms, very, very say.
Some data, because they
It's interesting just to know, what are we talking in Vermont at a given
You
year?
can get crop insurance on 3 acres.
Yeah.
Get crop insurance on 3 acres.
I think, an example in Tunbridge.
Based on.
Years ago, I think there was this kind of event in literally like a 5 acre. Sherwood area where, 2 inches fell in like a minute. It was unbelievable. And the road crew had, 100 trees were knocked down, but it was literally like, like a spot
Very
in town.
Yeah. Anybody collecting data on that, yeah.
Right. This sort of thing.
3 inches of rain in half an hour and a barn roof ripped right off over the top of my head. Been there.
Yeah.
Seen it.
Yeah.
Winds,
Massive erosion.
what kind of winds?
It was a microburst. It was absolutely horrendous. Absolutely, the roof peeled off, commodity shed roof peeled off. Gully erosion in quarter mile up the road and quarter mile down the road, nothing.
Right.
Just-
Like apocalyptic.
Yeah,
Well, okay, so I'm keeping notes for Michael Grady, and I'll say that, that we're wondering whether, we're thinking about including something like this, we're wondering whether even necessary, or whether it's already sort of built into to the powers that the board would have if they wanted to do that.
don't let perfect be the enemy of good. No, it's hard to write one. Something like this, perfect, but we can write it good.
What I'm suggesting, we're suggesting, because right now it says. I believe it still says this, I don't have the most current one, but. The secretary may verify the occurrence of an eligible weather condition claimed under this section through a site visit or through use of available data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration from other federal or state certified weather data sources or from other public or private weather or satellite data or models. It does not say whether, that's just to they can use those to verify a severe weather event. Does not say that they can use. If so, say, I mean, if they confirmed that I had a severe weather event that knocked my corn down. I think, and there were funds available, then it seems like you know, if I wasn't awarded for my losses, it's under what we have right now, they would basically have to award my farm for my losses. If everything is, if I filled out the application appropriately, that I showed that I was eligible and that my corn was flattened and not saleable, I had those losses. According to what we have right now, they would have to award me.
Yeah, I don't know that, I'm not sure that they would have to.
They wouldn't have to.
Yeah, so I'm reading, this is the version that is posted on today's, or maybe it was yesterday's. But I think the language is the same. The review board shall review applications for assistance under this section, assess the accuracy and validity of the applications, and recommend to the secretary applicants who should receive assistance under this section. So I think that the board is using its discretion to decide who's going to get some funding. And so I don't think that there's any obligation that they would have to award funding to everybody.
I just get the sense that other programs like this purposefully utilize a regional, you know, they utilize the tool of having regional devastation so as to potentially limit the amount that's going out because they have to. So
Do insurance companies that insure your crops, or do they ever do site visits to verify what you have put on application? So would they in this case with our,
it says
Program?
a site visit or through use of available data on here.
okay,
But I just, the way it is right now, if there's $1 million in fund, it's gonna be first come, first serve. And they're going to award every application that comes in if it's eligible, given the criteria. How quickly is that money gonna run out?
Who knows?
Who knows? But if we give them the tool to spread, they don't have a tool to spread that out right now.
I understand, there may not be that many claims,
There may not be. There may
you know,
be.
and I don't know how you figure that one out,
If
right?
you don't have a claim and the claims tend to run out every year by September, what does that say for the rest of the farmers?
What if we put language in there that gave the board the authority to develop additional criteria to determine equitable distribution of the fund over time or something like that? I mean, I feel like this is a board that we're going to be trusting to make the final decisions. If they find that like, oh my gosh, they're giving it all away in the first quarter, then maybe something else is going to need to be added. But like, I don't know that we need to figure it out right now.
I like the language we had in that, you know, if it has $2 million in there, 5%.
I think that's I think that's where it's at.
Well, that's in.
That's 10,000. Right?
Yeah, John?
Does the board also have discretion on the amount of the award?
5%.
Like there are these,
5% of 100.
150 or 5%, but can they give a lot less? Could they go to, in Greg's case, be like, yeah, you've had a disaster, but because we have discretion, you're getting,
Says up to 50.
They don't have to
Up
do
to
that.
5%, right?
right? So they could just say you're getting.
And not more than $150,000.
Application we had come in.
Yeah, I think they have some discretion, but I think it would be good for them to know they have discretion.
Okay, so I will
That's good.
I will see whether I'll pass this along to Ledge Council and see whether they can come up with something that satisfies this concern. I think it's, yeah, I don't know that there's an easy answer. Okay, so then the question of opting in or not. I know we've heard from I know the agency has not testified directly, but they've shared some concerns and the farmers shared some concerns about that yesterday. And I know we've, had some robust discussion about it. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that now, or if we're still sort of, some people are in favor, some are not.
I'm generally in favor of it, but I guess one of the concerns I have that has been brought up several times is the administration of it. Is it something that's going to be difficult to do? Having money coming in, what does it take for personnel, et cetera, to manage this as it happens? That's my concern.
Actually, kind of like having a current use fund that almost costs more money to administer than it brings in. I hadn't thought of it that way, Leland. When I think of opting in, I think you're creating insurance. And it's a totally different way. I understand what you're trying to do, Michelle, and it's noble. I don't think you'll have many farmers opt in.
It's just that there's a cost to the administration.
And if 1,000 farmers opt in at $200 a piece, it's a $200,000 fund that could be wiped out after storm. That's where I'm going with it. I'm not, if it was there, we'd be fools that Nelson Farms not to opt in at a rate that's going to substantially lower than commercial insurance. But I think you're creating insurance, and then someone might look at it and say, well, that's an insurance policy and that's got to go over to insurance and whatnot and different rules.
And the other thing, since it's they're parallels to dairy margin coverage, it'd be like you paying the premium or the state paying the premium for you for dairy margin coverage. And then at some point they say, well, the money ran out. So even though you paid the principal,
Yeah.
there's no money available in the fund.
Yeah.
So it's not a guaranteed payout.
I think it's gonna add administrative costs for sure.
That was
Pretty much all of the fees are gonna get absorbed in the administrative costs is my guess. I would venture to guess.
Um,
A registry might be interesting. Because the agency is always looking for that, like so if you say, I follow the RAPs or I follow the AMPs, put me on a list somewhere, that would be interesting.
If there's a digital form of pre-registration
Yeah.
that's kept on a website.
You could do like a Google form that honestly would take like somebody who's smart could design it in 20 minutes. And somebody who's not smart could probably fill it out in 15 minutes.
Right.
If they're smart, they could fill it out in 5 minutes about technology.
Are you challenging my lack of skill? You worked with me earlier this year.
Well, I'm just saying, it's pretty simple. Filling out a Google form is pretty, like a registration is not a big deal. And honestly, there could be another way to and here is a place to deposit your $100, which might be more complicated. And maybe it's more complicated than it's worth. I just feel like in so many ways, we're trying to do good work and we don't have money. And if somebody potentially is going to get $150,000, it does not seem unreasonable to say, hey, chip in a little bit every year and maybe one day you're going to get back a big chunk.
I see where you're coming from. But I also can see that there are the administrative concerns that might really require us to be thinking, how much are we going to set aside here that we have to carve out for, and we haven't talked too much about that, but that we'd have to carve out for the agency and, you know, taking it right off the top, regardless of, you know, how many claims there are. And also I worry about an expectation that all right, if I'm paying, I'm going to get something.
Mhm.
And what if I'm not? I mean,
All right, right, because there's not gonna be enough for everybody.
Yeah.
Certainly not.
yeah. So, plus you know, when we think about it, and I'm speaking actually because I asked Heather about this and what her thoughts were, and she said, well, she thinks of it more like, you know, the federal disaster programs, to the extent that they provide anything, you don't have to enroll in that. You don't have to, you know, pay anything to be in that program. So, yeah, I'm feeling like maybe we should leave that for now. Again, it's something that ultimately the board could come back and say, you know, maybe this would be a good idea. We're asking them to report back anyway. So,
What about the board itself? Are they going to, is that going to require funds?
I think that that came up at one point, and there is, where they get a per diem
Okay.
Yeah,
compensation. Yeah, that's written into the bill.
Nothing that would be significant that would, well, I suppose if they had a disaster every month, they'd be busy.
Yeah, yeah. The per diem is authorized under a certain section of statute that spells out how much it is, and it may be tied to a federal number. It's not generous, it's not generous. Okay, so I will suggest then that we move ahead without that provision. And then that leaves us just with the logging section of it. And I'd like to have Jed here for that conversation, and maybe we can leave that until tomorrow. We've got some time that if I can arrange Mike to come in. I know he's busy with other things, but if we can pull him out of some other things, maybe we can have him here too. And we may be getting close to having something we can have a straw poll on anyway. So,
I'm thankful we're living up to the name of our committee, including that.
yeah,
Really. I don't think they get near the services they deserve in this building.
yeah, you were here, John, for a couple of years, 4 years when I wasn't in this committee, and I don't know whether forestry was as, you know, got as much airtime as
We
farming.
got quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think maybe it was just flow of bills in that
Yeah,
case. We didn't certainly have anybody like Jed on the committee who was.
We didn't have Jed, yeah, and there wasn't, I mean, the loggers are represented by the forest products group, but there wasn't a separate logging group.
Right, but like Sam Lincoln was deputy commissioner at that point, so there were certain.
There was that, yeah.
Sam is
Yeah.
Carolyn Partridge, for quite a while.
Sure, just to clarify
Yeah.
on the declaration of emergency. I think I do agree with. In fact, we limited it to 5% of the total funds available awards, and it's up to.
Okay.
So the board could use their discretion if they have to give less.
Yeah.
To spread out so that all, you know, that potentially. I mean, the hope is that everybody who applies can get something.
5% of, now, we don't want to say 5% of what's remaining. Because if it starts at.
Yeah.
Starts at 2 million. And then all of a sudden there's a disaster and it drops to 500,000. You don't want to say 5% of what's remaining, it's still the 5% or of whatever the initial start off point was.
I just got a text, there's an alumni photo for Emerge that I should go stand on. the
All right,
steps
thank
for,
you.
so.
Hey.
Have a good weekend. I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
I will do my best to remember the chocolate eggs.
Yeah.
All right, see you tomorrow.
And we're on the floor at 8:30 tomorrow.
Okay.
So I think we've got no more need to discuss that.
Okay.
As long as everyone feels similar.
Okay.
I'm eased by, you know, the realization of that.
Okay.
And I feel, you know, that if there's the world's unluckiest farmer who you know, yeah, just the hand of God just went like that, you know, and that was the only one, and they still should be eligible to apply, which they would be.
It happens. It does happen, as you said, down in your town and
Yeah, everybody has, you know, knows if you're farming, you know that farm.
There was
this
a-
farm or that farm.
There was I don't know if he's a farmer or not, but there was a man who swept away in flood last summer in Peachum.
Right.
That's what I was wondering.
He worked
Side
for
by
the-
side for.
worked for the towns.
You know,
Yeah, I couldn't remember.
He
what
was
it
out
whether that would be
Yeah,
possible.
checking,
yeah,
checking roads.
A few years ago. up in-
Yeah, it's like about that.
yeah.
When you're heading, because I could see.
East.
Up the hill in Welcott, there was, there's a little river that comes down through and some guy drove across the bridge and it just, he drowned too. Wow. It was probably 10 years ago.
Okay, anything else? Why don't we wrap it up then? We'll, yeah, plan to do this tomorrow after the floor.
How long's the floor tomorrow? Not very long.
I don't know, you gonna get up and bring any great snakes today?
All right. We're done.